It was a warm summer evening when I first heard the crying man. I was walking home from a friend's house when I heard the faint sound of someone sobbing. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I got closer to my apartment building, the crying became louder and more distinct. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but all I could see were empty streets and closed windows. The crying man's sobs were haunting and desperate, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he needed help. The next night, I heard the crying man again. This time, the sound was coming from outside my apartment window. I opened the window and looked down to see a man sitting on the sidewalk, his head buried in his hands. I didn't know what to do at first. Should I call the police? Go down and check on him? But before I could make a decision, the man got up and walked away, still crying. Over the next few weeks, I heard the crying man every night. Each time, he sounded more desperate than the last. I tried to ignore him, but his sobs would echo through the empty streets and to my apartment, haunting me long after the sound had faded away. One night, I decided to follow the sound of his crying. I crept down the stairs of my building and out onto the street. The crying man's sobs were coming from a dark alleyway, and I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The alleyway was empty, except for a small pile of clothes and a pair of shoes. The crying man's sobs were coming from the pile of clothes, and I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, the sobbing stopped. The pile of clothes began to move, and a figure emerged from underneath them. It was the crying man. He was tall and thin, with sunken eyes and a gaunt face. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his hair was matted and unkempt. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "Help me." I didn't know what to do. Was he homeless? Mentally ill? Did he need medical attention? Before I could say anything, the crying man got up and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the alleyway. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with the crying man. I would search the streets at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But he was always just out of reach, his sobs haunting me from a distance. One night, as I was walking home from work, I heard the crying man's sobs again. But this time, they were different. They were louder and more urgent, and I could hear the sound of footsteps pounding against the pavement. I turned around to see the crying man running towards me, his eyes wild and desperate. He grabbed me by the arm, his grip tight and cold, and whispered, "Please, help me." But before I could say anything, the crying man collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing with sobs. I tried to help him, but he was unresponsive, his body shaking with an uncontrollable force. Suddenly, his sobs stopped. The crying man's body went limp, and he lay still on the pavement. I checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. The crying man was dead. I never found out who the crying man was or what he needed help with. But his sobs still haunt me, echoing through the empty streets and into my dreams. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and still, I can still hear him crying.